Chapter 12. Pip is close to death. I paid Clarriker's Miss Havisham's £900 and felt glad that Herbert's future, at least, was safe. Clarrikers were going to send Herbert to India to open a new office there. So, while helping my old friend, I would be losing him at the same time. Wemmick advised us to move Magwitch out of the country in the middle of the week. So we decided to row the boat down to Clara's house on Wednesday, collect Magwitch, and continue right down the river to Essex, where we could stop one of the foreign ships sailing from the port of London to Germany or Holland. With luck, nobody would notice us or suspect us. Our friend Startup agreed to row instead of me, as my hands were still too painful. However, when I went back to our rooms on Monday, my head full of arrangements for the journey, I found a letter addressed to me and delivered by hand. It said, "If you want information about your guest, you should come tonight or tomorrow night to the old house near the lime kiln on the marshes. Tell no one. You must come alone." I did not have time to consider. I rushed out again and was just in time to catch the afternoon coach. I stopped in town only to ask about Miss Havisham. She was still very ill, it seemed. Then I walked fast onto the dark, lonely marshes. Soon I arrived at the lime kiln, which was still burning, although the workmen had all gone home. I pushed open the door of the old house, which I thought was uninhabited, but to my surprise, there was a bed, a table, and a candle inside. Suddenly, the candle was blown out. I was attacked from behind, and my arms were tied close to my sides with a thick rope. The pain in my injured arm was terrible. In a moment, the candle was lit again, and I recognized my attacker. Oleg! I saw he had been drinking, and I knew I was in a very dangerous situation.
"Now," he said fiercely, "I've got you."
"Why have you brought me here?" I asked.
"Don't you know?"
He replied, drinking straight from a bottle.
"Because you are my enemy. I lost that job at Miss Havisham's because of you. And what's more, Biddy would have liked me if you hadn't been there. You've been in my way ever since you were a child. And now I'm going to have your life. Tonight, you're going to die."
I felt I was looking down into my own grave. I could see no possible way of escape.
"More than that," he said, "I don't want anything left of you. I'll put your body in the kiln. Even your clothes will be burned, and in the morning there'll be nothing left."
I realized I had not told anybody where I was going. Nobody would know where to look for me.
"Another thing," he said, smiling cruelly. "It was your fault your ugly sister was attacked. I did it. I hit her with the iron chain your comic left on the marshes, but I did it because I hated you."
He drank again. I watched the level of the liquid go down. I knew that when he finished the bottle, my life would end.
"And I know all about that convict you're hiding. I waited and watched outside your rooms and on the stairs. You fell over me once. I've got a friend who's going to inform the police about him. Yes, Compassion'll make sure he's hanged when you're dead."
The last of the rum went down his throat, and picking up his hammer, he came towards me. Determined to fight, I shouted as loudly as I could. Suddenly, the door was thrown open, and Herbert and Startup rushed in. With a violent shout, Oleg jumped over the table and escaped into the night. My two friends had found Oleg's letter to me, which, in my hurry, I had dropped in my room in London. They had suspected some wicked plot and come straight to the town and then to the marshes to find me. Luckily, they had arrived just in time. They took me back to London that night and looked after me carefully all the next day, so that, although my arm was still aching and I felt very weak, I was fit enough for the planned journey on Wednesday. It was a cold, bright morning when we set out cheerfully down the river. I steered the boat, Herbert and Startup rowed. At Clara's house, Magwitch was waiting for us, wrapped in a dark cloak.
"Dear boy,"
he said, putting his hand on my shoulder as he sat down heavily in the boat.
"thank you."
We rowed eastwards down the river all day, looking round all the time to check that no one was following us. Magwitch seemed quite happy, smoking his pipe and watching the water.
"You don't know what a pleasure it is to me, Pip,
He said once.
to be with my dear boy in the open air."
"You'll be completely safe and free tomorrow," I said.
"I hope so, dear boy. But looking into the future, well, that's like looking for the bottom of the river, isn't it? Can't be done."
He remained silent after that. We decided to spend the night at the little riverside pub. It seemed safe because there were no other guests, but the pub owner asked us a question which worried us. "Did you see that boat go past, gentlemen? Rowed by four men with two others on board. It's been up and down the river several times. Could be a customs boat." When he left us alone, we discussed this information in whispers. In the end, we decided to go to bed and then set out the next morning just in time to catch the ship to Hamburg. I woke early, and when I looked out of the window, I saw two men examining our boat, but I decided not to wake Herbert or Startup, who needed their rest after rowing all the previous day. Late in the morning, we rowed into the center of the river. We could see the ship to Hamburg coming closer. Magwitch and I picked up our bags and said goodbye to Herbert and Startup, so that we would be ready to stop the ship and get on board. Suddenly, a boat rowed by four men appeared from nowhere and came out very fast into the center of the river, close to us. A fifth man was steering, and a sixth, his face hidden in his cloak, whispered instruction to the steerer. They all stared at us.
"You have a convict there who's returned from Australia,"
shouted the steerer.
"That's the man in the clock. His name is Abel Magwitch. I'm a customs officer, and I arrest him."
Suddenly, their boat was touching ours. The Hamburg ship was almost on top of us, and the ship's captain shouted the order to stop engines, but it was too late. At the same moment, the customs officer put his hand on Magwitch's shoulder, and Magwitch pulled the clock off the other man in the boat. It was Compeyson. And as I watched, he fell backwards into the water, his face full of terror. The huge ship hit our tiny boat with a great crash. Somehow the customs officer managed to get me on board their boat and Herbert and Startup, but our boat sank and the two convicts had disappeared. Soon, however, we discovered Magwitch in the water, badly injured, and pulled him into the boat. He told me that he had fallen into the water with Compeyson and then been hit by the ship. I believed what he said. At the time, there was no sign of Compeyson, whose dead body was found several days later. Magwitch was taken to prison to wait for his trial. I arranged for Jaggers to be his lawyer, but Jaggers warned me there was almost no hope of saving his life. Magwich's thick wallet was handed over to the police, and Wemmick was quite annoyed with me about it. "Really, Mr. Pet, to lose so much cash," he said. "You see, Compeyson was so determined to get his revenge that you couldn't have saved Magwitch. But you certainly could have saved the cash. That's the difference. But could I ask you something, Mr. Pet? Would you come for a walk with me on Monday morning?" It seemed a strange request, and although I did not really feel like accepting, he politely insisted. I arrived at the castle early on Monday morning, and after a glass of rum and milk, we set out on the road. Well, said Wemmick suddenly. "Here is a church. Let's go in." And when we were inside, there was another surprise. Well, he said again. "Look what I've found in my pockets. Let's put them on." As he had found 2 pairs of white gloves, and his postbox mouth was as wide as it could possibly be, I began to suspect something. And when I saw the aged come in with a lady, I knew I was right. Well, said Wemmick, still pretending to be surprised. "Here's the aged and Miss Skiffins. Let's have a wedding." And so Wemmick was married to Mrs. Skiffins, and we all celebrated afterwards at a little pub near the church. I was delighted for Wemmick, but I could not stop worrying about Magwitch. He had been so badly injured that he was moved to the prison hospital, where I visited him every day. I read to him and talked to him and did everything I could to make him comfortable. But day by day I watched him becoming weaker, although he never complained. To the prison guards, he was a dangerous criminal, but to me, he was an unfortunate man who had at least some goodness in him. I could not leave him now. At his trial, Jaggers was proved right. The judge decided that Magwitch, a convict sent away for life who had returned, must be hanged. I could not accept this terrible punishment and wrote to all the important people I could think of asking for mercy for Magwitch. But all of them refused to help. I noticed on my daily visits to him that he was getting much worse. He lay in bed looking calmly at the white ceiling. Sometimes he could not speak and just pressed my hand. One evening, as I entered his room, he smiled weakly at me.
"Dear boy," he said, "you're never late."
"I don't want to lose a moment of time I'm allowed to visit you," I said.
"Thank you, dear boy. God bless you. You've never deserted me, dear boy."
He had spoken his last words. I touched his chest, remembering that I had wanted to desert him once. He put both his hands on mine. "Dear Magwitch, listen to me. You had a child once who you loved and lost." He pressed my hand gently. "She is alive. She is a lady and very beautiful, and I love her." He was too weak to speak any more, but he just managed to lift my hand to his lips. Then he looked peacefully up at the white ceiling again. Slowly, his eyes closed and his head dropped quietly onto his chest.